Hey everyone, and welcome to the It's Canon podcast. You're probably wondering, what the heck am I listening to? A midweek episode. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. We recorded this episode on Sunday, and we went just about 3 hours, and I actually flat out said that this recording's been 3 hours in a marathon. So right when we stopped recording, Phil and I literally looked at each other, and I think we thought the exact same thing, and Phil flat out said, split that up into 2 episodes. A 3 hour podcast is way too much. So we have split up the episode into 2 shows. So earlier in the week, you heard us talk about all things geek. We were talking about movies, and we were talking about Star Wars, and we were talking about this and that, and then now you are listening to us midweek as we talk about PlayStation 5 and the reveal, and we get into in-depth discussion about backwards compatibility, the games, the specs, our thoughts. You get to figure out just how different in age both Phil and I are because of what we were talking about, and Phil's laughing in the background right now. But it was a fun episode, but I fully understand that a 3 hour listen along can be a little too much. So we decided to split up the episodes into 2 halves because it was about 3 hours overall when you take into consideration.
We took a week off.
Yeah.
You get 2 episodes.
There we go. And that's Phil. That was Phil that you just heard there. So, yeah, it was a really good episode overall, and I hope that you kind of like the way that we split it up. We tried to split it up as best as humanly possible. So stay tuned. You will come back. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to hear the second half of Phil's favorite song, Winds of Change, and then we're going to start talking about our picks of the week. And then we're going to jump into PlayStation 5 and all things PlayStation 5. So thanks so much. And we're back. I'm going to keep playing this song just for Phil.
Jeez. We're talking about remakes, and man, oh man, that just comes out and slaps me like a 2x4. Scorpions, come on.
Nah, man. Let it happen. Just let it happen.
Oh, jeez.
Welcome back to the It's Canon podcast, where this week we are talking about all things geek. In our Geekathon, our Geek Mania, Geekapalooza, whatever you want to call it, we're getting back to the roots of the show on the It's Canon podcast. I am Boris, and as always, I am joined by Phil as I point to the webcam like a moron.
Well, I think that's my cue. Hi.
What the fuck?
I'm still like rolling around and the Scorpions tune there, the Winds of Change or whatever it was. Jeez.
You should have seen your face when you actually caught on to what it was.
I could believe it because I felt like a little part of me died inside. So, and the song's great. I just hadn't heard the Muzak version of it. So,
yeah, I know. Wow, that first quote unquote half.
Well, this is episode number 2.
Yeah,
we took a week off, but we're going to double dose you.
Yeah, exactly. So, like I mentioned, and I will mention again, this week we are talking all things geek. We just want to get back to the roots of the show. We just want to, and some would say in a winds of change, getting back to where we started, really. And, as much as I love what the show has become, there are times when, we don't need to talk about conspiracy theories or how the world's going to end or how shitty humanity is, and we just talk about things that make us happy, or remakes to piss Phil off, or comic books to piss off Tyler. So, yeah.
About right.
So,
hey,
now that
we're
back,
all here to have fun and maybe get a little escape from, it's obviously lots going on in the world.
Yeah.
We've discussed it, and yeah, I like talking about this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
This is more where I need to go mentally.
More of your...
Oh, I'll give you an update. As if I almost forgot. Animal Crossing.
Hold on. So You just like it's hilarious because I was gonna give you the signs of shut up so I can talk because I was gonna ask you, hey Phil, you know what we haven't talked about this week? Animal Crossing. Why don't you give our fantastic listeners a 1 minute ish, so I can cut it and put it on Instagram, update on where you are in Animal Crossing?
I have farmed, fished, and ground materials endlessly, and I have now paid off my house. So I
Wow,
feel that's an accomplishment because that was $2.5 million for that last installment, and that's a lot of coin in that game to grind. And
but
I
then,
don't do the turnip market. All right, everybody, I don't play the turnip game.
dude, you literally just stole my thunder yet again. Because here I was. You see me holding, well, our listeners don't see, but Phil can see me holding my tablet because I am holding here on my tablet a IGN article that says Animal Crossing poll. Are you still buying turnips?
That is a racket. The turnip thing can fuck right
All
off.
right, explain to me, as someone who doesn't want to touch Animal Crossing with a 10-foot pole, what this fucking is.
All right. So basically, in the economy that's in this game, all right, you can choose to grind and fish and all this other stuff. But on Sunday mornings, this little thing shows up with turnips on her head and she sells you turnips. All right. And it's an arbitrary price. Sometimes it's $97 for a turnip. Sometimes it's $107. Sometimes it's, more or less. So she has got this arbitrary price. You purchase them, and then you have to go into little Nook's Cranny, which is your local pawn shop, and sit there and because you buy stuff and you sell stuff. So I call it a pawn shop, and there's two little raccoons running the place. All right. So you go in there and you ask them each day how much are turnips selling for. All right. And then they tell you, they give you an arbitrary price. Most of the time, I'd fucking get pantsed in the turnip market. I'd spend $30,000 or $50,000 on turnips, and then I'd get $20,000 in return because they only are good for 1 week. Then they rot. So they put a gun to your head. And the way I guess the exploit here that other people are doing, it's not really an exploit, but it you have other friends on other islands, and then you notify them when turnips are at a high buyback price. So one time, the little raccoons shocked the shit out of me, and were saying that they would give me $367 for a turnip.
Wow.
That was the only time that I've seen. Then I was like, oh man, I wish I had 100 turnips now.
Yeah.
You know, because that would be big money. It's easy money. But
And
as far as the game goes, if you're willing to put the time in, if you're willing to just sit there and play it a couple times a day for half an hour, 40 minutes, you can do pretty well on money.
interesting. Very interesting.
It's
Turnips.
it's to the point where my niece actually went out and bought a Switch Lite and Animal Crossing so she can play now. And she's loving it.
I
Loving it.
just, I can't. I can't. I can't. I can't.
I
I
caught
won't.
so many sharks this week, and the sharks sell for like $15,000 each. So that's how I was banking coin because I think I'm gonna say this. Hopefully Nintendo's not listening. I think the algorithm for fish are fucked up in this game. I don't know if it's just my game. I'm curious. Other listeners who are playing it, are you having this? Because I'm noticing that I'm getting runs on the same fish over and over and over again. So I'll start fishing, and all I pull out is seahorses. I'll start fishing. All I pull out are flounders, olive flounders. And then I go through these runs where I get three or four sharks in a row. So it's weird.
I'm getting
It
runs
never,
just listening to this.
yeah, I know this is like your Riverdale.
Now I know how you felt when I was talking about Gilmore Girls.
Yeah, exactly, man. Exactly. It's, it's, yeah, a really weird phenomenon, that game.
I it's teaching kids very interesting lessons.
Well, I, I started experimenting because I'm like, I clear cut an island one time because there's absolutely no repercussions for anything you do when it's not your island. So I just went and started like cutting down every single tree, picking every single weed, and just filling my material store up in my own game but just completely ravaging this like random island that they fly you to do this to. You
Have you
can even destroy the rocks.
have you opened up your island yet?
No, I have not. I, my guilty confession here is I don't have the Nintendo subscription.
Uh,
I tried to buy it last night and it didn't. The store wasn't working. So I'm hoping to buy that soon, so at least my niece can come visit me on my island and I can visit hers and give her some stuff to get her to move along in the game because she's already frustrated.
can't with this game. I fucking can't. You, I just can't. I can't. I cannot. I
So
can't.
what's your geek pick of the week, Boris?
All right. So every time that we have these geek offs, these circle geeks, as I'm going to call them, we will give our geek pick of the week. And it's just really anything in any medium. It can be a video game, it can be a movie, it can be a book, it can be a telenovela, it can be whatever you want. Anything that you kind of want our listeners to check out. So this week, my pick of the week is actually a. Fuck. It's a it's it's a book. It's by Mary Lou. It's called Batman Nightwalker. Now the reason why I'm laughing is because it's like really meant for teens more than anything else. Um, and it's a fun book. It's different. It's kind of different. There's parts of it that I like and parts of it they didn't like. I didn't like how they kind of changed the backstory to some of the characters. Like Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent knowing each other in high school. Kind of weird. Very C. You know what? This is a very CW like book. And there's a lot of CW elements in this book. But Batman Nightwalker, basically, he's a teenager, so this is before he was even Batman. He gets in trouble by the police because he stops a crime, but he doesn't do it legally per se. And he ends up getting community service, and he works at Arkham. He befriends a criminal, and shit goes crazy from there. But it's really cool because like they kind of get into the seedy underbelly of Gotham, which is always my favorite element of Batman to really take a look at and investigate. Because for me, Gotham is kind of like a character on its own. So it's a really cool book. It's Batman Nightwalker by Mary Lou. You should check it out. Like I said, it's a Y, like a good old young teen novel. And I am filling out a horrible stereotype right now, but it is what it is. So,
Yeah.
Phil, what is your pick of the week?
I'm gonna go with Shadows of the Dark Crystal novel. Again, oddly enough, it's a young adult novel. There's a series of 4 by J.M. Lee, and he's also did a lot of work on the actual Netflix show. And I think these books obviously were the basis of the show on Netflix, but they actually have different, like the characters may have the same names, but they're completely imagined differently in this. This is the before any of this became a reality for the TV stuff, and it's really fascinating to read. Um, how these characters differ from maybe what we know on the TV show, and also the little differences in the world. Because the great thing about novels and comics too, I think Age of Resistance comic came out this week. It's finally off its little hiatus of coronavirus. So number 8's out now. The great thing about this is that you're not limited to the practical puppetry stuff. So the worlds are explored in a lot different way. You can have environments and whatnot that maybe you couldn't put a puppet in on TV or couldn't put a puppet in convincingly on TV. So it's interesting for that, the seafaring and just the different tribes, the Gelflings and how they relate to their world and how I just met in the second book their Song of the Crystal or whatever it is. Um, I just met what basically are Deets people, living in these caves and
Yeah,
whatnot. So it was a little bit different than it was in the Netflix show. But I immediately knew what was happening. It's all familiar.
yeah,
So it's kind of a fun little thing, because you get to see Rianne and you get to Gurjin and all these different people and Gurjin's sister. And there's a whole bunch of the characters that are in the show that are big characters in the books. So
Very cool.
that's my pick of the week.
Yeah, that makes me feel better for picking a YA novel. It's just not me.
Yeah,
It's just
you know
not me.
what? I find the young adult stuff sometimes gets a different leash, a different tolerance from publishers and content creators, and as well, they're pretty easy to read.
Yeah.
You know, it's not they're not going to beat you down with a lot of complex stuff. You know, that's what I like. But that's why I like reading the Expanse novels and stuff like that too. They're well written. You know, it doesn't young adult doesn't mean that it's bad. You know, or that it's poorly written. It just means that they marketed it to an audience. You know, but overall, I find that the content, some of the best books in Star Wars are young adult material, like Claudia Gray, Lost Stars. Poof. I think that thing stands up to anything I've ever read in Star Wars. It's probably way ahead of any other book
Lost
as far
Stars,
as
yeah.
yeah.
Um
It's just mind blowing.
yeah, Claudia Gray Bloodline was really good.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it was that one. I'm not as big of a fan of Princess Leia.
Hmm.
You know, there was some challenges in that because of the way, I guess, the decisions that Ryan Johnson made with Star Wars. You know, the Last Jedi. Um, there were some decisions in that and how they portrayed the Admiral Laura Dern's character,
Yeah.
Holdo or whatever, and she was displayed way different in Bloodline, and then they changed it up
Yeah.
in the rewrites. So it really brings about a sore point for me, and that is the fact that the canon in the novels doesn't really match the canon in the movies. And it just is a piss off because, you know, just like in Aftermath or whatever, you end up reading three freaking books.
Yeah.
And then when they disconnect from the story, not that Aftermath did that really, but I'm just saying when it does disconnect, it's a bit of a piss off as a fan because you got my money for the books and then you get my money for the stupid movie. And then I'm like, what the hell happened in that movie? Because that character was completely different or they got written out or whatever.
That's why I still put all the blame on Kathleen Kennedy because she eventually, at the end of the day, allowed Ryan Johnson to make these significant changes from the story that J.J. Abrams laid out, and we were left with a completely different movie from what was originally supposed to be there, and well, it just didn't work out. So at the end of the day, my
Well,
all the blame, in my opinion, should go to Kathleen Kennedy on what is now the dark circle that is Last Jedi.
I'm not even gonna blame Kathleen Kennedy on this one. To be honest, I think that it's easy to blame Kathleen Kennedy. She's a fantastic producer, all right? Bar none, she is a fantastic production person. I don't think that she should, I think that they should get a story person, you know, a creative content person in there in Star Wars land. And secondly, I think Disney and the board of directors or whatever, they're the ones that ultimately hold this bag of shit because they put directors against one another in these movies, and that should never happen. And it blows my mind because you look at what Kevin Feige does over under the same roof as Marvel. If that was going on, what went on in Star Wars went on in Marvel, Marvel wouldn't be anywhere where it is today. If you
Yeah.
had movies contradicting each other and not getting their canon right and not getting their timelines right, why the hell is there not people at Star Wars sitting down and putting together
But
timelines?
isn't that what they
Story.
have? That's what they have. They have someone literally and a group of people literally looking at the canon of everything.
Yeah, they have people analyzing it, but I don't know that they have the people needed to drive it. Like I hear that Kevin Feige's now involved in Star Wars, so maybe that's the fix. I don't know, but the fact is that you have two movies in the Star Wars, you know, sequel trilogy that make sense, and one movie that sticks out. And you know, love it or hate it, it seemed to contradict what the other movie did, and then the third movie tries to undo what happened in the second movie.
Which is why I blame Kathleen Kennedy, because at the end of the day, the buck stops with her.
Well, if she's wearing the creative hat, then sure,
Yeah.
you know.
So,
But as far as I'm concerned, she's the production. You know, it just says to me that there's a void or a vacuum where there should be story control.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not talking
And
about the type of control that you need to do this or you need to do that and diversify this and marketing group crap. I'm
yeah,
talking about story.
canon.
All right. They should have known exactly what each movie was going to be before they even went to the directors. All
But
right. They should have said, we need these 3 events to happen to these characters. All right. I get number one, you took a chance. You're going to see if you can revive the fan base. Right. It was already there, but you're going to see if you can intrigue them. And then you take those characters and you go, okay, we did the nostalgia mix, we did this, but actually people care about Rey, people care about Finn, people care about all these characters. So now let's come up with the next 2 movies.
I thought J.J. Abrams did that. I thought that was the whole point that they brought him in, is to like lay it out, and that's why he only directed the first one, and he kind of left the reins for other people with the story already there, ready for them, and it was just
I
changed
think
up.
my understanding is he had recommendations, but each director was told that they're responsible for their episode.
Right.
All right. So Ryan Johnson goes and he creates. And then, you know what? The infamous Disney and Kathleen Kennedy, again, this is where I do think she's guilty, starts interfering with that.
Yeah.
Right. And starts, like, oh, well, I don't know if we like this story theme. You guys are fired, Lord and Miller. You guys go away now. And we're going to bring, Opie in and fix the movie. Um, it's just, that kind of shenanigans, and it happened in Rogue One as well. uh, where they farted around with the directors afterwards. But you have to have something on the table that tells you what you're going to do. I don't think J.J. Abrams ever thought that Snoke was going to be killed in the second episode.
No.
All right, like we all know that the Emperor was forced into the third episode just because of the vacuum left after the second. And good on Ryan Johnson for thinking outside the box. It's not my favorite movie, but I'm not going to shit on it either. It's Star Wars now. You got to accept it, love it or hate it.
Yeah.
It's Star Wars.
Because
So
the thing is, I
it
feel
was
like
a
Ryan.
brave thing to do.
Yeah, I feel like Ryan Johnson gets a bad rep because of The Last Jedi. One thing about Ryan Johnson is that he might not be the best at taking already established characters, because we saw what he did with The Last Jedi. But he's a great director with originals and his own stories. Look at Knives Out, like that's a fantastic movie.
I have
And
to watch that.
yeah, it's on Amazon Prime now.
Yeah, it's on Prime now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And you know what? I follow him on Twitter. I didn't unfollow him or cast any aspersions to him about The Last Jedi from my standpoint. I do respect him as a filmmaker, and I do, yeah, it might not be the first movie I put in my Blu-ray player, but it's there.
yeah.
There's some highlights in it.
Like Looper
Um,
was one of my favorite movies. Like
yeah,
it's
Looper
just
is great.
yeah. Original
But
story. A lot of video games seem to feel like Looper, that we'll be talking about in a couple minutes. But before we touch on that, there's one thing that I do want to talk about, and it's kind of like the what the fuck moment of the week, and that came on Monday or Tuesday when you sent me a message of Dave Filoni wearing a Go Train T-shirt. For those of you who aren't from the GTA Toronto area, GO Train is kind of like Toronto's intercity rail network. And Phil sent me a picture of Ryan Johnson pretty much wearing a
no, Dave Filoni. Dave Filoni.
Dave Filoni. Whoa, yeah, Dave Filoni, of him wearing a GO Train T-shirt.
Yeah. So the story behind this, I was watching the Disney Gallery show, and Dave Filoni is wearing this Go Train T-shirt, and Go stands for Government of Ontario. So it's government owns the trains, and this guy's wearing an obvious, because the trains have a very distinct look to them, and you can see the logo with the Go on it. And go figure.
Huh?
I
Go
don't know
figure.
if it's just a pop culture T-shirt that he's got on, but Dave is pretty particular about his branding
Yeah,
because he does the wolf stuff, the hat, all that
yeah,
is very on point for him. So I'd love to know
yeah. My
what
favorite
that is.
Dave Filoni shirt is, I saw like a bunch on the internet. It was the Oscar lives Question mark.
Yeah, Ahsoka lives.
Ahsoka. Yep. That's
Yeah,
my favorite one.
yeah. That was, and the funny story about that is that he wore it at a convention,
Yeah.
and it sparked up people because everybody was thinking she's dead
Yeah.
after Rebels, and here he shows up with this T-shirt, and the rumors that she's going to be in Mandalorian season 2.
Yep. Well, we'll see what happens. So those are our picks of the week. We kind of diverted like we always do, but that was a good chat. And by the way, Kathleen Kennedy did ruin Star Wars, so that we're gonna end it there. No, it is what it is. Really, it's up for debate, and it will be one of those things that I'm sure that we talk about every few episodes. Um, but yeah, so the big news of the week, I guess, was on Thursday when Sony finally unveiled the PlayStation 5 and we finally got the first glimpse of what this system actually looks like. And they kind of not only gave us a look of the actual system and the controllers and the accessories and the peripherals, but we got some trailers and previews to some of the actual games and the gameplays and the gameplay. I'm hearing a weird echo, so sometimes I don't sound like I'm speaking proper English to myself. But in terms of the games, these are the games that we got a special preview to: Grand Theft Auto 5, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, which we'll talk about in a second, Gran Turismo 7, Ratchet and Clank, Rift Apart, Project Athea, Stray, Returnal, Sackboy: A Big Adventure, Destruction All-Stars, Kena, Bridge of Spirits, Goodbye Volcano High, Oddworld Soulstorm, Ghostwire Tokyo, Jet the Far Shore, Godfall, Solar Ash, Hitman 3, Astro's Playroom, Little Devil Inside, NBA 2K1, Bugsnax, Demon Souls, Deathloop, Resident Evil Village, Pragma, Horizon Forbidden West. Those are the games
Yeah.
that were essentially
How many
announced.
retreads do we get in there? I hear Oddworld is just a redo of one of the older games. I hear Gran Turismo 7 is going to be even better than Gran Turismo 6. I hear NBA, the new one, is better than the old one. I'm sure there's going to be a new Call of Duty in there, and we're Rockstar just mailing it in and giving us the same freaking game we've had for 7 years.
Yeah, it is
But it'll look
7 years.
great. Like the things I saw out of there are, I like the idea of Stray as a cat person myself. That one, I was just like, okay, I didn't see this coming. I do, just to expose my full hypocrisy, the idea of the Spider-Man Miles Morales thing. That's pretty cool. The world could use more Spider-Man games. I just don't know what the heck it is. They say it's its own IP, similar to the other game, but not quite the same. So who knows? And they're saying it's going to be out this year. So
Yeah.
it'd be kind of fun that way. Um, yeah, you know what? Console launches are tough, man. Like, good on Sony for jumping out and putting it out there
Yeah.
and giving us pictures of it. And I know people are saying that's freaking huge and whatnot because they're scaling it because it's got that 4K drive in it, so you can tell how big the CD is. And then you look at the rest of the real estate for this thing. It's a pretty hefty little unit.
Yep.
I like the looks of it. I know that that's a big topic of conversation for people, love or hate. What do you think, Boris?
I like it, all things considered. Let's take a step back. We'll talk about the looks, then we'll talk about other, and we'll finish other stuff, and then we'll finish off with the actual games. So in terms of the actual looks, I like it. You see, but I approach this very differently than a lot of people do. Like, it's no secret. I used to work at BlackBerry, and the amount of technology that would go into those phones at the time, um, you know, that really controlled the look of your device. You can only make things so small. You can only put so many heat sinks. Technology is limiting us to a certain extent on what the actual industrial design is going to be. So in regards to, like you said, the disk drive and all the technology that goes in there, some of it just you can't get small enough to make it look sexy and sleek. Who knows what the temperature the actual system runs at? So that's why it's there are various heat sinks and whatnot, and it's curved and created in such a way that it can disperse the heat. These are the things that um, the technology minded people take a look at. It might not be the most appealing and appeasing to the eyes, and that's what makes the difference between like a Sony and an Apple. And Apple is fantastic at industrial design. But overall, I like the way that it looks. If you compare it to Xbox, the new Xbox Series One.
The Bork.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fucking square. You know.
And there is a element to the Xbox design that is appealing,
Yeah,
like in its simplicity and whatnot.
it'll make a
It's
good.
it's it's kind of cool. It is a cool looking console. I think PS5 goes for the flash a
Yeah,
little more, like definitely with those fins and the
yeah,
two tone, and they have another version of it without the drive if you don't want a 4K Super Ray drive.
yeah,
There's you know, digital only.
yeah,
So I know EB Games and GameStop are crying over that. Xbox has already done that with the Xbox One S, digital, all digital
yeah.
console to get that price point down. So it tells me that it's probably going to be, and I know they didn't talk about this, but it's probably going to be a fairly heavy price tag, especially here in Canada. I know if the rumor is it's going to be $599 American, but that's like $800 Canadian.
Yeah. Hey,
And dollar for dollar, you get the same thing,
it
So we pay
makes
more.
it makes sense at the grand scheme of stuff like that. It's going to be a super expensive system. It is like if you take a look at the actual specs itself, it's actually crazy what's actually on the inside. Like if we take a look at the specs, it has 8 Zen 2 cores at 3.5 gigahertz. The GPU is 1028T T-flops, 36 CUs, again 223 gigahertz. It has a custom GPU, 16 gig RAM. Um, the I/O throughput is crazy at 5.5 gigs, and it's got the 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray drive. It's just like when you take a look at the parts and pieces themselves, Sony is probably spending $300 to $400 a piece each
Yeah.
before it gets to consumers. What I believe it was the PlayStation 3 that they were or 2, I forget which one, that they took a hit on.
Three.
3.
They took a loss.
They took a
Yeah.
loss
Yeah.
of like 20, 30, 40, $50 a unit per unit. But it worked out because once they released the second generation of the system of the hardware, they were able to kind of bring those costs down, and the parts were smaller. So that's why you get variations of the system down the line of their slims and whatnot. This is the first version. Everything is going to be a lot more expensive right now at launch because this stuff is that state of the art. And taking a look at the specs, this is a huge jump compared to the PlayStation 4. PlayStation 4 is already 7 years old. Like it's actually crazy if you think about it. Like 7 years in between systems. That's quite a bit of time. So I think that in terms of price point, it makes sense. In terms of the whole optic drive and not having or just having the option of digital only, it makes sense. These companies obviously get a bit of money every time they sell something on their store. EB and those games and those stores, they're just gonna have to kind of conform, and kind of see what they can do by selling the digital codes to games. What can they do to get you into the store? To keep getting
We
you.
must buy more Funko Pops.
That's exactly where I was going with that. Is
Yeah.
that's why we're seeing EB Games or GameStop, as our American fans know it, as getting toys and collectibles and exclusives. And I'm sure that even moving forward without having the physical copy of the game, EB will still be able to sell the EB exclusive version of a digital game if you get the download code from EB as opposed to a Sony store or a Microsoft store or something like that. So, in terms of price point, it makes sense. In terms of release, Again, that wasn't official. Everyone is saying holidays 2020, so probably Thanksgiving-ish. Between Thanksgiving and Christmas, to me, makes the most sense. What I did find interesting, though, is that there was no information on actual pre-sales, which leads me to believe that they don't even know how many copies of the system they're going to have at launch because of the pandemic, because of, if you think about how a piece of electronic is created with so many parts coming from all around the world coming together, and supply chains really being cut off because of the pandemic. We don't know what these supply chains look like. We don't know what type of a hit, they even took in the supply chains. Like, are they getting enough CPUs for the amount of systems that they wanted to initially create? So I think that's why they're kind of holding off on pricing and actual release and pre-release on sale date because of those reasons. We don't know. There's still a lot of unanswered questions from the pandemic.
Yeah, well, what I was reading this week, interestingly enough, is now they're fearful that they're going to have too many consoles on the market because they feel demand is going to be absolutely low because of
Because
this
of yep.
pandemic. People just don't have the extra cash to spend on their console. So they're worried about surplus now. Like it's no longer a supply chain, like as much as a supply chain as it is about consumer money,
Yeah.
disposable cash. And that's the big concern leaking out of these console makers is, they seem to have overcome a lot of the where are we going to get the parts now that they've decided on it. For me, I look at this whole thing and I go, it's your move, Xbox. Last time you guys went first with the Xbox, One X and or whatever it was, Xbox One. You guys went first and you kind of shit the bed. And Sony went in and just completely revamped their launch. And I get it. That's why Sony and Xbox don't do this anymore. So Sony went first this time and they put it out there. And worry that I have is that Sony's got all the exclusives. Microsoft are getting burned on not having much aside from Halo and Gears of War. There's not a lot, for Horizon or Forza. There's very few titles that really compel you to stick with an Xbox. And all your friends are going to have PS5.
Yeah.
So that's another big determining factor for Xbox. Xbox are sitting there just going like, I just can't see the logic in what they're doing. Well, I get what they're trying to do, and that is buy indie game developers and try to get exclusive content from them. But it's not AAA, man. And I know some of the games that were premiered for Sony are going to be on. I think GTA 5 is going to be on the Xbox, the new one.
Yeah.
Man, oh man, I can't wait. There's
But
going to be some exclusive. Larry Herb was all over Twitter.
but
Like,
what's it called? Spider-Man is probably one of the biggest
that,
franchises out there, and that's
yeah,
exclusive to PlayStation.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
And, PlayStation have gone out and they've gotten, and, you know, feather in their cap to Guerrilla Studios. All right. You had a company that was making games like Killzone, which weren't bad games.
yeah.
But Horizon is head and shoulders a totally different, compelling game. Like that is in the sci-fi / realm of CD Projekt's The Witcher for me, as far as you know, the experience, the world, the exploration, everything.
Yeah.
And to be able to headline with that as a sequel, just really speaks to how amazing Sony's developers are and the breadth of them, because they're not even talking about God of War 2, or any of their other big stuff. Last of Us 2 is coming out for PS4.
Yeah.
Like they've got such great developers making exclusive content for Sony. Single player, multiplayer, every type of thing. Uncharted. You can only imagine how many home runs Sony has just waiting to unpack and beat down Xbox with whatever their next move is.
I have a question for you. Very serious
Sure.
question for
And
you,
I own both consoles, by the way.
which you may have already answered my question. But you think
Ah,
we've talked about streaming services we've talked about, streaming rights and exclusives and exclusivity, and that being the key and the destruction to streaming services, in my opinion. Do you feel that having so many exclusives for Sony and on the other side of the coin, exclusives for Microsoft, do you feel that that is hurting the video game market more than it's helping their bottom dollar?
I think the competition is good in the sense that it's trying to keep both companies honest. Like, let's face it, we need to have two video game companies at
Yeah.
the very least. And Nintendo, I don't even put in that ring because
No.
Nintendo is its own. I had this problem this week explaining to my niece about a Nintendo, and I'm like, I'm like, when you have a Nintendo, you get that it's Nintendo. It's got its own exclusives like Mario and Animal Crossing and all that. But when you look at Sony, I don't fault them at all for going out and getting this amazing content. I'm mad at Xbox, Microsoft, that they didn't take more care in their IP. Like, they should have been locking up more content. Like, why bother publishing a box or a gaming system if you don't have games? Crackdown 3 sucked.
Yeah.
Like
Like the biggest
like
series.
Sea of Thieves was their big like out of the blue hit. Like
Yeah.
eh.
Sea of Thieves. I'm not touching that one. Um, I think they dropped the ball big time, uh, because Mass Effect was a Xbox exclusive until 3, and then they dropped the ball, and there goes that exclusivity. And I'll be honest that I had an Xbox 360 basically only to play Mass Effect.
Yeah, and it's funny because you're right. There was a bunch of games that were on the Xbox that were pretty much only available there, I guess because developing for Sony at the time had its challenges. Uh, so you had games like Mass Effect and BioWare. If anything, BioWare is just killing itself in the market
Yep.
after the debacles of what's gone on with
Yeah.
its content and
Yeah.
whatnot. And nothing lasts forever. I get it. But like I say, I'm really applaud Sony for understanding that gamers want a game.
Yep.
I guess like Xbox. You know what Xbox is selling this on? You're going to be able to play all your old games, and the Xbox Live Pass or whatever it
I've
is,
had this
which I
discussion.
subscribe to that,
Yep.
and I like it. I like it. It's like Netflix for games. I found out really quick Kingdom of Hearts isn't a game for me
Yeah.
because I had it on my Xbox Hall Pass or whatever. I could just go download it, you know, fire it up the next night and I go, ooh, yeah, I don't like this. Glad
Yeah.
I didn't spend my money on it.
Yeah. Yes.
And then there's games that you do like and you play it and you get your achievements and you're happy.
Yeah.
Right.
Remember,
But
if we take a look at
that
the
service needs titles.
yeah, if we take a look at the marketing itself, I find that Sony is gearing itself more towards gamers. And I'm talking about like console gaming. Like I don't even want to touch PC gaming. I know people who are PC gamers look down on console gamers with a holier than thou mentality, and you know who you are. But in terms of console gaming, I find that Sony really markets itself as a gaming system first, and it does other stuff. Whereas the way that Microsoft markets itself, it's your all-in-one media box. It does
Yeah,
everything.
the biggest use that my Xbox 360 or Xbox One S has is it's got a 4K Blu-ray player.
Yeah,
Like honestly, so if I buy a 4K movie, like an actual disc, I know I'm old, but I like being able to watch content on my own.
hmm
If I put one of those in, it plays and it looks pretty.
yeah,
You know, that's basically it. It was a really cheap way to get a super drive.
yep,
And as well, there's a whole bunch of old content and whatnot. Microsoft are sitting on a mine of stuff,
yeah,
but they just don't seem to bring out Crimson Skies 2.
yeah, yeah. So you never actually answered my question. Is it hurting the industry or not?
No, I think competition's good.
Yeah, Phil thinks
Oh, did you
competition is
see
good.
did you see the other news this week?
What's that?
Because I didn't talk to you about this.
What's that?
EA are making a new Star Wars game.
Oh, the leak, which then EA had to say, "Oh
Became yeah,
yeah, by the way,
yeah.
it's true." Yeah,
we're
So
making it looks like a flight simulator or something, like something about, about X-Wings versus TIE fighter type stuff.
yeah, Star Wars Squadrons or something along those
Squadrons.
lines.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
like kind of inadvertently confirmed by EA through a weird leak, which is kind of hilarious. And it just, I believe that the trailer is coming out, and I'm vying for time to see this and confirm. Yes, the trailer is coming out Monday, June 15th at 8 a.m. Pacific, so 11 a.m. Eastern. We'll
Yep.
be able to get the first official trailer of Star Wars Squadrons, which,
They came up with this little ad last night, pilots wanted, with
there
an
you go.
X-Wing on a tarmac.
There you go. That looks so cool. That looks
I
so
know.
cool. Um, which I've always been a huge fan of their flight simulator games. Like, I absolutely loved the old X-Wing and TIE Fighter PC games. Those were
I bought
so,
it for my PC, man.
yeah,
I saw it on the Steam store, and I'm like, I gotta buy that.
yeah.
It's
TIE
such a
Fighters
blast.
was so good. Like, those two games were great. And then on N64 we had Rogue Squadron. That was a game that I really liked. And I know that there was a sequel. The name evades me, but there was a sequel to Rogue Squadron. I've always been a fan of the flight simulators of in Star Wars. My favorite boards in every Star Wars game is, hey, when you can take flight of one of an X-wing or whatever. My favorite
Hmm.
board in Shadows of the Empire was always the last board when you blow up the Death Star. Um, and yeah, so it's the new
Yeah,
Star Wars
and
game.
the great thing about that is it's going to be probably coming out for both consoles because EA isn't really tied to any exclusives. They're their own company. Um, I guess, going back to your original question though too, it speaks to the industry though that basically these independent titles, these exclusives have to be owned by the company. It's interesting.
Yeah,
Like there's just not that many software companies out there anymore. Like you have Activision and EA and making the Call of Duties and Overwatch and these titles that kind of cross over and Ubisoft as well. I know Bethesda. There's a bunch out there, but it just seems like most of the power stuff though is really hitting in Sony's corner.
well, just remember, like, like you said, Xbox is going out, and I'm sure Sony is doing the same, but they're buying all of these um, video game companies. Like Microsoft a few years ago bought Rare. Rare made games like
Mhm.
Battletoads and Perfect Dark and GoldenEye 007 and things like that. And Xbox now owns them, which is why the new Battletoads game that was coming out was an Xbox exclusive. So so to answer my own question of is it hurting the industry overall, I say no, because there are people at the end of the day in the life cycle of a full system. A lot of people are going to end up getting both systems at launch. Yes, it could hurt it because you're pretty much being told and forced to choose one just because of the price points. But over time you'll be able to get both of them. Um,
Yep.
what is cool though is companies like EA, Activision, and those types of companies are now really investing a lot of money on cross-platform gaming. We've seen it with Modern Warfare, with having the cross-platform capabilities. So whether you have an Xbox or a PlayStation or a PC or whatever, you'll be able to play with your friends regardless of what they have on the other side. So that's kind of cool and kind of counterpoints the whole, exclusivity part of it, and that's how these third party developers are really able to go forward and help overall. So, overall, I think it hurts the industry at first at launch of a new system, but over time it really doesn't matter because people are going to own whatever system and or both systems throughout its life cycle. So going back to
It's
the
it's going to take 2 years. Like
yeah
it's going to take 2 years for the dust to settle and for us to be able to make any informed decision that's not a gut reaction. All right. So I know, oh, I'm probably going to go PlayStation, not because PlayStation was announced this week, but because that's what my friends play on.
yeah
Right. But it's going to take 2 years before they start developing quality titles that take advantage of that system. up until then, they're going to be glorified demos.
Yeah.
Like that's my fear,
But
and it's been proven to be true in the past. Like there's been games in PlayStation 2 and stuff that were just shit on launch. They looked great, but they didn't play great,
we'll look at
and they
PlayStation.
didn't have great writing. They were rushed pieces of crap that got forced out and put into the churn at $60 or whatever the price point was to get my money
Yeah.
and to
Remember,
show off the system and make me feel good about my purchase.
the launch
But
of a
then
system typically is a weird time for developers because you are still trying to figure out the technology to the new system, even though you have all the experience with the old system and their APIs and whatever engine you have to build the game off of. So it's kind of like a really awkward time for a lot of developers, and there's a lot of questions that a game might start off on this current generation console, but then the distributor, me being or that being Sony or Microsoft, will say, hey, we'll give you whatever you need and we'll support you if you could port your game to the new system, the updated next gen console. So a lot of times the games that come out at launch aren't necessarily made for that actual next gen console. It's very rare that there's at launch there might be one or two games that are actually meant to be made for that new console. So you're right that a lot of times it's
yeah,
vaporware and bullshitware, as I like to call it, in terms of what we actually get. And it takes about, a year for actual games and good content to really start coming out. When PlayStation 4 came out, outside of FIFA is FIFA, but, there was the Call of Duty Ghosts game that came out. And that was really the only game that I played a lot of at launch up until I don't even remember what the next play. I guess Dragon Age was the next PS4 game that I really bought, and that was a couple months after launch.
yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the games. Like you say, that I don't know if they retrofit the games or whatever, but even back then, that was such a convoluted launch between Xbox and PlayStation because of the revolt that consumers had, right? Where Xbox totally miscalculated, Sony completely re-rigged the presentation,
Yeah,
right? And they go out there and they just basically say, whatever Microsoft told you, we're just going to do the opposite,
yeah,
right? Because we hear you're mad. And then it impacted games too, because that put a huge delay on games like The Division and whatnot that were promised to be launch titles for the PS4 that ended up taking a year or two to get out because there weren't the same conditions inside the console's workings.
yeah.
So the social aspect of it, being able to be honest, I don't know what the heck we were all complaining about, but remember the idea that you could digitally lend a game to a friend?
Yes.
All this stuff. Like these were the things that Sony and Microsoft were saber rattling about. Sony or Microsoft go out there and make the announcement, and maybe it's revisionist in its memory to me, but Sony went out there and people were like, "No, I want my discs. I want this. I want that." And now look, most of the sales I think are digital, right? Like
A lot are.
I don't know. I pre-bought Last of Us 2. It started downloading. I've downloaded it.
Yeah.
It's on my hard drive right now. I'm just waiting for it to unlock,
You,
on Friday night
yeah.
or Thursday night.
Thursday night, Friday morning,
Yeah.
whatever you want to say. No, that's exactly it, and I think that's a very important point that you brought up. Is that whole sharing experience among gamers is that at the core of it, people don't share games the way that you used to. It takes so long for you to even finish a game that by the time that you're done with it, your friends probably have already played it or they found a used copy before you could finish it. And I remember there was a few years ago on Xbox, I believe it was Battlefield, and I bought a used copy of Battlefield, and it was so restricted on what I can do that I needed to pay extra money for the online experience, which unlocked the entire game. I'm like, fuck that. So these systems are already not wanting you to share your copy of the game with other people. There's so many
Well,
restrictions that
the
they're,
developers don't want to, right? Like,
yeah,
look at Mark Rain and Epic.
yeah,
He's just like dead set against the resale market, and I
yeah,
get it. Like, it must suck because you put a lot of work into creating X copies, and then you put them out there, and people are trading them, and
yeah,
they're not getting a cut of that. So I get it as a creator. I'm not going to bag on the people who create.
Yep.
I totally understand it. But as a consumer, though, you have to understand video games, I think, take advantage of us more than any other medium in terms of over promising and under delivering. How many times do we see games that say, oh, we're going to give you 60 frames per second,
Yeah.
4K, blah, 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 blah. And that thing is shit. Like, look at Anthem. Look at Anthem.
Yeah.
Everything about it was just like, oh my God, this thing is going to be awesome. It looks like you're going to be flying around like Iron Man and all this. And the game was literally launched broken.
Yep.
They're still fixing it. Like, it's going to take them years. And people are going out there and slapping down hard-earned money on it, and you can't blame them for abandoning that product. And maybe someone else loves it. I don't know. I gave it up after it started. Reports started coming out that PlayStations were melting down because of the game, like they were physically bricking. So I was just like, okay, I guess that disc is never going into my system again.
Didn't
Like,
Fallout 76 had the same issue?
oh, Fallout 76. Oh my God. I won't even touch it. Bethesda as a
Yeah.
company. All right. Okay, to their credit, the Wolfenstein stuff is okay.
Yeah.
And they do have the capacity to make a pretty good game on launch.
Yeah.
But my God, is it ever a joke between me and my friends about Fallout and anything else like that they do is just bug infested crap.
Yeah.
Until it gets patched.
Yeah.
So I'm like, and I'm an idiot because I go out there and I buy it day one no matter what because I'm so excited because of all the side chatter and momentum. I'm like that little kid mentality going to the movies. Gotta get my ticket, gotta get in line.
Hmm?
I get all amped up and then I just get mad at Bethesda for lying to me.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like, man, you said there's going to be clans. You said there's going to be this. You said there's going to be this gameplay. You promised me for a year now that this is going to be the way it works, and you didn't deliver it in the game.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't work. It's like fucking straight out broken.
Yeah.
I just remember laughing my ass off reading the Fallout 76 stories on Twitter and whatnot.
And then look at, you have the other side of the coin with EA and when they released Battlefront 2 and the issues that game had, not because of glitches, but just because of the mechanics and the whole lottery system that they essentially had.
Crass consumerism. Like, let's call it for what it is, people. EA make more money off of FIFA because people are buying packs, right?
Yeah.
They're buying these player packs like crazy.
Yeah.
I can say to you, honestly, I've never spent money on an EA game inside of it.
Same.
All right. I can't say that for all games. I have bought stuff in the Division, maybe an outfit or something like that. I have, in Destiny, I think I bought some stuff too.
Yeah.
But by and large, I'm not the kind of guy to do that. And what they did with Battlefront 2, I don't know. The graphics on Battlefront and Battlefront 2 are great. All right. I enjoyed the single player story in Battlefront 2. All right. Because I read the book that accompanied it. I'm that big of a geek. The rest of the online play, I won't even touch.
Yeah.
Like, I pretty much buy those games so I can put their spine up in my Star Wars rack, my bookcase.
Yeah.
It's just so I can say that I have the content, I guess, because I just like collecting it. But the game itself was just not my cup of tea. But then you put that consumerism crap on top of it, and it's just garbage, man. Like that these kids are going out and buying it, and then they have to keep on buying, and it's a AAA title. There's no excuse. You tell me that game, as it stands right now, you could probably go out and download it for free. It's probably like,
funny,
$10, $10,
So I can
$10.
tell you because I bought it for $16 a few months ago, and this month it's actually a free download for the PlayStation Plus members.
Yeah, and
So.
you see, well, you can't be too hard done by the $16, right?
No.
But the issue is just how much extra cash they get out of you. I guess I don't have as big of a deal with it with a title like Borderlands, right? I know I'm going to play the shit out of Borderlands 3. I bought the full on, everything's in it, the season pass. So all this stuff gets announced and it just comes in, and then me and my friends play it because we all bought that premium version for the $100 or whatever it was. But I'll tell you, I was like pretty pissed about the Division too, because I finished that the other week. We're still doing end game stuff or whatever, but we pretty much finished most of the content, and I had to buy a $30 add-on in order to play the New York Division, which I thought was included in the game.
Wow.
And they got my money, but the game was already downloaded.
Yeah.
It just needed that unlock, right?
Yeah. See, my brother refuses to pay an extra cent on a game. He's so old school to the point that he's like, those motherfuckers should have finished the game. You know, the business model is what's really changed. It's not that they do it on purpose. Sometimes they do. Sometimes the game's just not done, so you have to, get the final version downloaded. But more often than not, it's just part of the the world now. It's part of the lifestyle. It's having DLCs and having to pay more, and it's just a different mentality. But you still have old school gamers or cheap gamers like my brother who just absolutely refuse to pay an extra cent.
I don't think it's being cheap as much as it's about the principle of it. And this is where consumer advocacy groups or whatever are in our corner, is that they should be delivering a product that works. All right, like I get it. There's bugs and maybe little things that crop up, but holy shit, like
Having a flat out
Call of
broken.
Duty is episodic, so I get it. There's like these seasons, right? Is they're trying to be Fortnite or whatever. But Fortnite didn't charge me anything, and not that I've ever played it, but Fortnite's free. So I get the model of milking me during the game.
Yeah,
But when you go out with AAA titles and you demand that the consumer spend $70 to $100 right out the gate, and then you further mine them,
yeah,
it's disgusting.
yeah.
It's disgusting practice by them. And the thing is that little kids are, maybe it's hooked up to their parents' credit cards and
That's
whatnot. And these kids are going through and buying all this add-on content in game. And the parents are freaking out later, and the company's going, oh, it's not our problem. Your kid's addicted to gambling now, and we
yeah.
didn't do it. I don't know.
Like how many stories just, and that was my whole point. That's kind of where I was hoping you would steer this. And it's just that, like, these kids like 7, 8, 9 years old who are becoming addicted, and they don't know any better. They just, like, they just hit okay and confirm, and they don't actually know that they need to pay for stuff per se. And if they do, they don't understand the value of a dollar or how much the stuff actually costs, their parents. And you see these horror stories of parents getting like thousands of dollars in credit card fees based because of like Fortnite or NBA 2K or one of those types of games, and it's just ridiculous.
FIFA.
Yeah, FIFA. Yeah, it's just it's
FIFA is like, I know, like there's horror stories of people spending over like tens of thousands of dollars or more
yeah,
just off of those packs, man.
yeah,
Like
it's crazy.
I think FIFA accounts for like 1/3 of the bottom line for EA
Well, it's
as a
also,
company.
remember, footy is the international sport, so every person will
Exactly.
play that, as opposed to NHL where only the Canuckians and the Americans are going to play that. Unlike I guess their NBA
NBA.
Live, only. Well, I guess that's the other one that would be somewhat international. But FIFA is FIFA. FIFA is soccer. Soccer is international, and it has so many licenses from so many leagues that it's the game that they can capitalize on the most. It's just unreal how they can get so much off of that game. But
The funny thing is I've anything in game on any FIFA, and I've been playing it since off of the Sega Master System.
yeah,
I used to play FIFA,
yeah.
right? The
The first
Sega move.
the
I
first
remember that, the
FIFA game
goal,
that I
right?
played was FIFA '98 Road to World Cup. So, and I've
Oh
been
wow.
playing it since. But let's.
I think mine was like 80. Here's a funny story. All right, talking about my past here. I played FIFA. I forget which version on Sega Master System with a guy named Brian Keane, and he went on to work for EA to do the visual design for FIFA.
Wow,
He's in Vancouver, last I heard,
very
doing
cool.
FIFA titles and Need for Speed. I think
Nice.
there's two little properties there that he was
Need
working
for
on,
Speed.
projects that he was working
That's
on.
a franchise that's fallen flat on its face.
Yep, it shit the bed.
Yep. That, because remember when they were what Grand Theft Auto was?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, You used to set your clock to Need for Speed, man. Like when that was coming out, I don't know what the fascination was. I guess it was because you got to be against the cops or be the cops. It
Yeah.
was a really interesting thing. And now I don't know. I've tried playing the games because they're pretty much free, right? So you either get it through the EA Pass or they come on PlayStation for free. Having both systems is great for seeing what kind of free crap I can get each month. Um, so you try it, and I'm like, the last two have been total train wrecks, man. They feel like movies that are poorly acted in. And it's bad when studios do that.
Yeah.
That's where I want more actors coming in because we need integrity and performance because these guys just slap a mocap suit on some putz off the street and they don't deliver their lines or give a convincing performance,
Yeah. And
and
that's
it's frustrating.
part of it. And it's we now look at the performance overall of a video game. Like there's certain games, that when voice acting became new, if they those games were just absolutely horrible. Like the first game for me that really took it to the next level was Mass Effect, in terms of voice acting and just having actors and turned CGI and telling a full story. But before that, there was a few here and there, but it wasn't to that level. But yeah, it's cool actually being able to see actors and kind of that now we judge a game by its end to end creative vision, from how the game plays to how the game looks to how it's acted and everything, and how the game runs. A game like Fallen Order, Star Wars Fallen Order. I generally a lot of the excitement washed away because of how buggy it was at launch. And it
Oh.
took me a while to recover. And then when I got to the ending, I was actually pretty pissed off.
Yeah, you know what? Fearless Fred finished it
Yeah,
this
I
week.
saw. I saw.
And I'm surprised that he didn't hate it more. He was upset that it was short in
Yeah.
his. You know what? I spent more time backtracking in that game than any other video game I've ever played, and that's the substance of it.
Yeah.
Is you'd have to try and figure out how to get back to your ship after you ventured all the way in through this maze of things, and then the map was just it was cool, but it was terrible to navigate with. You couldn't
Kashyyyk,
figure out like levels and the complexity of things. So I spent more time just freaking running around in circles in that game than playing
Dathomir
it.
wasn't too bad. Kashyyyk was a pain in the ass, but the worst was that first planet, that ice planet where you're in all the ice caves and stuff.
Yeah.
I got lost so many times to the point where I literally rage quit and, stopped playing for a couple days because I got that
Yep.
lost. Or I didn't know
Yep.
how to
That
get
that
to.
was a brutal first thing. Kashyyyk had areas that were frustrating, especially what was the place with all the elevators?
Yeah.
And the Imperial base. That was the first level, that ice planet.
Yeah, that was the
Because
ice
you go
planet.
there the first time, and then you have to go back there,
Yeah.
and you got to uncover this whole other area of the map, and that was just fucking brutal.
Yeah.
I was so upset trying to figure out and looking at YouTube channels at how people are walking back and trying to identify hallways, and turn here, jump. Oh,
Or be
yay, my ship.
the worst was there was an I forget what planet it was on, but there was a console. But anytime I turned around, the console wouldn't light up and say, "Hey, do an action," because of just how the cameras were facing. So I was literally lost for days trying to fucking figure this out, and I was doing it right, but the fucking thing wouldn't fucking light on.
Yeah, and you know what? That's where shout out to all the guys like Rad Brad and everything that make these YouTube episodic game things because I rely on those. When I get stumped, I'm like, oh man, I really want to finish this game. I want to have fun with it. And I look up something like that and I go, oh okay, that's the console there. It's not lighting up. Exactly. I'm not. I feel for
So,
you, man.
so one day, probably after the game's been out for a year and the game being Jedi Fallen Order, we should talk about that ending.
Oh, you know what? I thought I was okay with it until I talked to you, and then I got really upset. That's why I was surprised that Fred didn't get upset about it, because that whole ending invalidated the entire experience.
And it also
I've never
it
I've never
cheap
seen a game shit itself like that. Like honestly, what were the writers thinking? There's obviously not much because they make the player endure as a protagonist this whole experience and be so bound to this idea
Yeah.
of doing this, of getting this information to get the Padawans, right? You got to get the Padawans. Who's gonna care for the Padawans? So you got this whole like save the children theme, and then at the end he just pisses it away. What? On a whim? Like it wasn't even like there's ways that I think I told you in a rage exchange that we had. I figured out like a way to end that game that would have made total sense
Yeah. And
and not betrayed itself.
yeah.
Like, ay, ay, ay.
I
Like,
felt
and
ve-
then
I
that
felt very
nostalgia kick with Darth Vader and oh.
Yeah, I felt very angry like that ending because it just like you said it completely invalidated the entire game and all the work that you did, and the game might as well finish with a big middle finger. George Lucas just giving you the middle finger, Kathleen Kennedy giving you the middle finger, saying we fucking got you. Thanks for the $90,
Yeah.
assholes.
You know what? And to EA's credit, it was a single player game, which is what we
Yes.
all wanted.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed the experience of being in the universe, except maybe a little too much in the universe as far as walking through those tunnels.
Yeah.
But the story overall was okay. The ending was stupid.
Yep. That
And
ending.
as well, it didn't hold up in canon.
Uh,
I know I pointed this
we
out to you, but
yeah.
some of those stormtrooper outfits and some of the gear that were there were definitely Star Wars, but not in the period that it was trying to explore.
Yeah, because it was supposed to take place 5 years after Order
Episode
66.
3,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm like, man, oh man, the Empire really kicked the shit out of stuff in order to not be using the ventilator class Star Destroyers anymore, scrapping them. Okay, that was kind of cool, but everybody was already decloned.
Yeah. There were
And
no more
all
clones.
all the Star Wars, like all the troops, the stormtroopers and everything were like episode 3 and higher. And I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure there was some pretty weird contortions according to Rebels and other things that take place in similar timelines that were vastly different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shuttlecraft,
No, it was it,
ATSTs, everything like that. Like an ATST from Rebels doesn't look
the
like Empire or Return of the Jedi, and all the ones in this game look like Return of the
Return of
Jedi.
the Jedi.
I don't know. Maybe there's, I'd have to look in one of the many books that I have in order to reconcile it, but something smelled odd.
You know what it is? It's because I don't think that the EA wanted um, us to take that deep of a look into the canon and into stuff because we recognize an AT-AT, we recognize these things, we recognize what a stormtrooper is supposed to look like. So I think they just, they had them literally on file quickly, and get them into the
Yeah.
game, and voila, they didn't want to do so much of the redesigns per se. So I'm sure that there's creative technological reasons why they went that direction, but it kind of hurt the overall experience in my opinion, just because if you think about what's in canon, and this is the issue with having something take place in canon, is that we do then take a closer look and with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that it all fits, which is why you have to be really careful about considering something canon or not.
Yeah. And, Star Wars fans do it, but we're also used to getting the short end of the stick,
Yeah.
if I may put that out there. Because, like I say, there's been so many times where canon just doesn't line up at all in
Shadow
our
of the
experience
Empire
as fans.
N64.
Yeah, exactly. There's just so they do have to be careful with it. I don't. I guess I don't rate video games too high on my canon list. So
Yeah.
that'll be the only forgiveness that I can give them because it is about the experience and it is about playing it at a certain point. So I had fun. They look like stormtroopers. I was a little bit tired of biker scouts while holding those stupid zappy weapons.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
There
could
was a,
counter
there was a lot of
lightsabers. But
repetition at certain but it was cool seeing the Inquisitors and kind of like their more of their backstory and that stuff. Overall it was a good game, but the ending kind of, like I said, did give you a middle finger, and we'll touch on that and go into detail as to why it gave us the middle finger at some point in the near future. But getting back to video games and the PS5 launch, something that I was thinking about last night, in kind of prepping of this show, is kind of like, the price point and how much should we invest in a video game console during its lifespan. And I started doing the math, and hear me out here. So when I bought the PS4, I'm not even gonna say, I'm not even gonna count the fact that I had to buy a second system after my original system got flooded. So at launch I spent all of these numbers are in Canadian dollars. So take that into consideration as well. So I bought the system, an extra controller, and two games for $650 at launch, day one, at Walmart, 8 a.m. Boom, 650 right there. And this game came out in November. By Christmas, I already bought three additional games, all at um about $92. It's essentially what they cost here. So by the end of year one, what I'm gonna call, I've already spent $930 on the system. You know, this system's been out for 7 years now. Every year, I for sure buy more than 10 games. That's about $1,000 in games a year. We're looking at an
yeah.
investment of at least $8,000 in this gaming system.
Oh man, I'm
I
ashamed
and
to
I
say this,
know that
but
you buy a
I've
lot
got
more than I.
I've got a lot of games and the VR headset, and I upgraded to a Pro,
Yep.
and yeah, and you know what? The funny thing is, and this is where I have a bit of comfort with Sony. Sony are great because their machines work. I still have my original PS3.
Yeah.
All right. Xbox 360, I went through 5 boxes.
Yep.
That Xbox replaced 4 of them. And then I just went out and bought a Gears of War exclusive
Yep.
Xbox 360. And that's been the beast that I have in my archives now. I've gone through 3 Xbox Ones. 2 of them Microsoft had to replace. And then I just got fed up. I traded in a refurbished one that they gave me as a replacement and got the One S. Just taking advantage of the trade-in deals, and it's only going to cost me $100 if I do this, so I do it because it's like produce. There's a life cycle on it. There's a fresh date. So yeah, I spent a lot on it, and it's crazy. It is absolutely nuts
So,
to think about
let's say
how
a
much money people spend.
typical person would spend, let's just say, $8,000 to $20,000 on the life cycle in terms of hardware, software, peripherals, accessories, etc., etc., on a gaming console. When you consider that, and there's a reason why I'm saying all this, when you consider that investment, how important is backwards compatibility to you for a new console? As you
Mm.
are dwelling this, thinking about this, like the thinking man.
Yeah, it's important, but here's the thing, right? It depends on how the console launches. If you tell me that I'm going to need to get rid of my old console to get the new console, then it's very important. But if I can have the two coexisting, not as important for me as a person because I collect the old console. I'll keep it.
Yeah.
Because I've ran into it many times where if you do a trade-in on that new console, you end up wanting the old console
Yeah.
for certain experiences. So it's worth hanging on to them. And for me, I'm lucky that I can afford to do that, knock on wood. Um, so it's not as important for me to have backwards compatibility, but for some people, it's vitally important. I know that is a metric, right? But yeah, it's again the stupid game. Remember Xbox? Oh, Xbox One will be completely backwards compatible. Blah 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 blah. And then they had to redo the library,
Yep.
right? And it took them years. Now, to their credit, they did it.
Yep.
So good on you, Microsoft. Good on you. And they just basically built an emulator, right? And then you'd go online and download the whole game in the emulator mode and just authenticate with your disc. Sony have been one of the few that did it well. Like I know the PS4 is its own little thing, but my PS3 is the original Fat Hog PS3
Yeah.
that can play PS1 games, that can play PS2 games. That made it so much easier to get rid of my PS1. I did get rid of that. I still have my PS2 because I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
So, but it does play the games.
So
Like I
here's the
can
thing.
put my original Metal Gear Solid disc into my PlayStation 3 and it works.
Yeah. Have you ever tried playing Metal Gear 1 lately?
Yeah,
It's
it's not
fucking
easy.
horrible.
I'm sorry, but I really like the idea of Metal Gear. All right, Metal Gear,
Oh, I love it. Me too.
awesome
Yeah.
property. I fucking hate playing the games.
Yeah.
I like thinking about what the games do. I like where the games are doing things, but I can't stand stealth games.
Yeah.
It's just no fun, you know. Just too much sneaking around, and I'm not into that. I'm the aggro tank guy. I go right in, guns blazing,
That's why Metal
and
Gear
hope that I can kill it
5
all.
That's why Metal Gear 5 was so good because you can do either or. You can go guns a-blazing with your horse or you can try to stealth your way into certain areas.
Yeah, but it's hard,
Yeah.
man. It's hard.
Yeah.
Old men like me need easy games. Need an easy setting, all
So,
right? I tried playing that game and holy cow, you cannot go in guns blazing.
yeah. So going back to the backwards compatibility thing, I had this discussion with my nephew, and my nephew, 14 years old, and as wise as he is, he's starting to, really get to into these things. And one of the things he said was that, hey, PlayStation didn't talk about the backwards compatibility, blah 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 blah. That's something that Xbox has because they announced already that their entire library is going to be backwards compatible. And then I posed this question to my nephew. How many times are you going to put in an original Xbox game outside of Halo to actually replay?
It's true.
And any game that is worth playing that comes from those original systems, guess what? They have HD remakes now.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say it falls right into our theme of let's make the old stuff new again,
Exactly.
so
So,
we can make the new Resident Evil 1
yeah. So here's
in
the
HD, 4K.
so here's the thing. I was like, and my nephew was like so harping on Sony about this, like a true gamer and a true internet keyboard warrior, and I'm like, hey kiddo, really, are you ever gonna play those games? And then I'm like, the important thing for these companies is to make it backwards compatible with at least the top games of the previous generation. Like if I'm here's a perfect example of what pissed me off with Sony when PlayStation 4 came out. uh, GTA 5 came out months before PlayStation 4. um and I bought the PS4 on release date at launch, and I gave my brother and my nephew my PlayStation 3 because it was his first real console. All he had before that was a Wii, so I just gave it to him. Unfortunately, I gave up on a lot of those games because there was no backwards compatibility. Native to PS4. So that's what to me where it is important, where you take the top whatever games and anything that was released within the last like year or two of the life cycle of
Yeah.
a system and make sure that it works with the new system. But to play every single game that has ever come out for that system beforehand, I think is just a stupid marketing ploy because no one's actually going to play those games, and if you are, you're going to play the HD remake. You try to play Metal Gear Solid 1 or Resident Evil 1 or GTA 3 on the original Sony PlayStation, and you tell me how good of an experience it is.
Yeah, it's true, man. It's true. This retro gaming, I know so many
Retro.
people who do it. Like I bought those little Nintendo consoles, so I could, fire them up in HDMI cable. $100 isn't that bad, and it's got the old controller. And I realized everything I hate about that old controller, and I realized everything I hate about those old games, about how difficult they were.
That's what I
They were
love about them.
challenging.
That's what I love about them.
You
But
know,
there's a difference between
and some
those.
people enjoy it, and that's fine, and that's totally great. It's not my thing,
But to
but it's
me,
just amazing how much it gets respun. And
yeah, it's different though for like Nintendo NES, SNES, Genesis. Those
yeah,
systems were just classic to a certain extent. But when you got to PlayStation 1, N64, Xbox, those games were horrible looking. We were in this awkward stage of 3D was new, so it looked cool at the time, but when you revisit these games, they're not good looking games at all. Final Fantasy VII, if you try to replay the original Final Fantasy VII release, it's not a fun experience at all overall to look at. That's why I say backwards compatibility to a certain extent is important, but the way that Xbox is going about it, and some people are buying, their ish, is that it's the entire library is going to be backwards compatible, and to me personally, that's just not relevant. I want to make sure that Last of Us 2 is going to work on my PlayStation 5. I want to make sure that Death Stranding, that Final Fantasy remake is going to work on my PlayStation 5. But I don't care that Call of Duty Ghosts 1, won't work
yeah.
on my PlayStation 5.
You know what was great? I'll give a shout out to Ubisoft on this one, but I think Assassin's Creed Black Flag was backwards compatible. So
Yes.
if you bought it on the PS3, you could put that disc into the PS4. I think it re-downloaded the game in the PS4 format, but it authenticated off the disc,
And I
so you
think
didn't have to re-buy it.
that's what I've heard rumors, and I could be dreaming this, and I don't want to look it up right now, but I think Cyberpunk 2077 is doing that as well. That if you buy it for this generation console,
Yeah,
you'll get like the automatic download for the next gen.
yeah, I've heard something like that too. So good on them. I applaud forward thinking like that, and
Yep.
it makes it easier as a consumer to believe in those brands. But I don't think CD Projekt run any shady stuff. I think they're pretty.
Yeah.
They have good integrity in the
Yep.
video gaming
So that's
world with The Witcher and stuff like that.
yeah. I'm not the biggest fan of The Witcher. It's just not my cup of tea overall.
Neither am I. It's not my thing. Not my
Yep.
thing at all. But I played it.
Yep.
I looked at it. I
I
observed it.
played it and I couldn't get past 10, 15 hours in.
Yeah.
So that was that. But so that's where I kind of stand on backwards compatibility and pertain as it pertains to these new consoles. If we take a look at other stuff about the PlayStation 5 announcement, they did say that the PSVR will work on PlayStation 5, and I think that is an important aspect of backwards compatibility because it's kind of its own system, as it's not part of PlayStation 4 per se. It's kind of its own thing that works off of that system.
Yeah, it just hooks up through HDMI. There's a little HDMI
Yeah.
block
Yeah.
that comes with it. I'm sure they'll relaunch the VR at some point, I guess, depending on the economics of the adoptions and whatnot. I know that there's some great content coming out this year for it, the Darth Vader stuff and Iron Man and
Iron
stuff
Man.
like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, and I took the just a Astro Boy or whatever it is, a little cartoony guy. His inclusion in that told me that either my and then looking at the final lineup, not seeing the headset there, that means to me that my old headset's going to work.
Yeah.
Because they're showing me games that are definitely VR games.
Yeah.
So good on Sony for standing by, because Sony don't have the best track record of
No, they
standing
don't.
by.
Yeah.
Some of their stuff, Vita.
Yeah.
So good on them for sticking with it, and I'm sure it's not the most beautiful thing for their bottom line, but I applaud them for taking the chance on it
Yeah.
and doing it, because VR is cool when you do it.
Yeah. I want to try it out at some point, but the price point just isn't worth it for me right now.
Right now, the price point's a lot better than when I originally jumped in.
Yeah, it was like six something when originally, right? Or something.
I got the one without all the extra doodads, because here's the trick: if you buy the one without the little wands, and you already have a camera, you get it for I think it was $550
Yeah.
at the time. And then you just bought the PS3 ones because they're the same thing.
Yeah.
You bought them used for
Yeah.
$15 at EB,
There you go.
and then you'd have what they charge you 100 for.
All right. So we've talked about backwards compatibility. We've talked about some of the specs. We've talked about some of the games. Like I mentioned, the game that I'm looking forward to the most is Spider-Man. There's a lot of talk about what that game actually is. Is it a sequel? Is it a continuation? Is it standalone? Tons of questions to be answered. Let's talk about the controllers. The controller. They say that there's a quote here. One of our goals with the next generation is to deepen the feeling of immersion when you play games, and we had the opportunity with our new controller to reimagine how the sense of touch can be added to that immersion. To that end, there are two key innovations with PlayStation 5 new controller. First, we're adopting haptic feedback to replace the rumble technology found in controllers since the fifth generation of consoles. With haptics, you truly feel a broader range of feedback, so crashing into a wall in a race car feels much different than making a tackle on the football field. You can even get a sense for a variety of textures when running through fields of grass or plodding through the mud. The second innovation is what we call adaptive triggers, which has been incorporated into the trigger buttons L2, R2. Developers can program the resistance of the triggers so that you can feel the tactile sensation of drawing a bow and an arrow, accelerating an off-road vehicle through rocky terrain, etc., 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 etc. So, it has the haptics, it has the new triggers, it has a built-in mic, it has the speakers. Um, yeah, it kind of looks
Yeah,
cool.
it's got a mic connection too, so
Yep.
you can put your headset
Yeah.
into it.
Yep. Yeah.
Um, it looks really cool. I'm excited for it, and as well, there's the 360 sound set. That apparently Sony's been working on that, the headset
Yeah.
for
So
the new type of sound. So Sony and their peripherals.
yeah.
I'm pretty happy with, you know, I don't really feel like the existing Sony controllers have varied much over the years.
Yeah,
You
this is
know,
by far the biggest shift in change since, the original non Rumble Pack PlayStation controller to when they actually
oh yeah.
introduced those. So, taking a look at PS5 accessories, since you brought that up, there's a Pulse 3D wireless headset offering 3D audio support and dual noise canceling microphones. There's the HD camera, there's an HD remote, and there's a dual sense charging station. Again, no release date, price points for any accessories, so who knows if these will be available at launch. I'm assuming that most of them will be, but probably limited quantity, and or who knows what the market is really going to dictate. But in terms of accessories, they have enough to get you, at a good place for a new console. And overall, I'm pretty happy with kind of what they have, and I think the media remote will be interesting because a lot of people do use their systems for other stuff.
Yeah, it's good. Xbox have been doing that for a while now
Yeah,
with the media remote. Um, the headset, I can say this. I'm a bit of a headphone geek.
yeah, I was gonna ask.
Um, yeah, so right now, most of my gaming, I'm doing Dolby Atmos stuff, which I would imagine this Sony thing is going to be very comparable. Sony were really good at 7.1 surround sound in their existing headsets, their premium brand that hook up to the PS4. It was a great experience gaming with those, and it's pushed me into some of the Plantronic stuff now for most of my gaming, and I just do it through the controller. So, but consoles like Xbox is something that's a big difference for me. I do enjoy Xbox because it has Dolby Atmos built in, so you can activate it and use it for music or whatever you're doing. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I hope Sony do the same thing in terms of keeping up with the HDR and the sound, because all that's part of the experience, right?
yeah.
Like it's like having a great stereo or whatever home theater setup. It's you want to have a great experience, and that's why you pay for the content.
Right. So one thing I do want to touch on is the whole expandable storage, because one thing about the PlayStation 4 that really hurt me at launch was only having a 500 gigabyte hard drive. Now, I know that a lot of people were swapping out the original hard drive, and you can swap in your own hard drive, but that's not really going to be possible with the PlayStation 5 at launch. You'll be able to connect non-Sony proprietary expandable storage to the USB, but actually putting in a new drive might take a little while just because of the technology that's being used on the PlayStation 5. So, that's kind of interesting news. It's good and bad news. It's good because you'll be able to expand your storage, but it's bad because, it's going to be a separate device as opposed to you being able to swap out hard drives. And that's just a technology decision that and a drawback there.
Well, Sony have really made big deal about this SSD
Yeah,
that they put in there. I think the rumors are is that it's going to be 2 terabyte on launch. So it's not quite as handicapped or diminished as the PS4 was on launch with the agreed 500 mega or 500 gigabytes was way too small, right? I think I'm rocking for 3.5 terabytes right now on my PlayStation 4.
internal.
Internal and external. I
Nice.
have an internal SSD hybrid drive running as my main, and then I've got an external additional storage. Now, anything that I'm gaming on, I try to move to my internal drive,
Yeah,
and anything that I'm not gaming on, I'll swap it out and put it over to the external, even though it plays fine off the external. Like if I'm in a pinch and I
still.
just want to play a game, but I think that's going to be a real issue with the new systems because the SSD, if it has any impact like my SSD computer does, it's gonna make old computers feel old. Like it's gonna make old games feel old,
We were just
right?
having
Because
this conversation before we started recording because the laptop that I use, it's my beefy personal non-work laptop. It's an HP Envy that came out in 2015 with Beats Audio. It's an i7, 16 gigs of RAM. I never updated anything. It's still using the original everything. It's got a GeForce graphics card. It's got everything. But there's one issue with this fucking computer. It has a non SSD drive and it just slows everything down. And it being so powerful and not having an SSD drive kills me so much because it literally takes me about 10 to 15 minutes to get to a point where I can actually use the computer. And but once it's working great. But that difference between having an SSD drive and a non SSD drive and an optical drive is just so crazy. So I
it's
think,
it's amazing how much my life has changed. All right, now I switched over to a MacBook Pro a while ago, an i5 MacBook Pro with SSD, and I've got an Asus VivoBook right now. It's amazing how different the experience is overall with just having an SSD and how spoiled I am now to hit the power button and have my computer up in like 30 seconds. Like that's just blows me away. And I don't take it for granted. I've even adapted most of my family's computers to SSDs as well because it's been such a game changer on the whole computing experience. So I can only imagine what it's gonna mean for PlayStation 5 and whatnot.
yeah, and that's the thing. Like, it's just, yeah. So I will say that that's where we are going to see some issues with PlayStation 5 and Xbox for sure in regards to external storage. And it'll be interesting to kind of see the size of these games because some of these games now are ludicrous in size. 100
Call of
gig,
Duty,
yeah,
Call of
100
Duty.
Call of Duty, 100 gigs, even for the free version, it's 100 gigs. It's just absolutely insane. It's insane. 100 gigabytes for a fucking game. And,
Yeah,
when you
and
think,
the updates are like 40, 50 gigabytes at a time. So I don't know what the end result is in terms of the total storage occupation, but to pull in 50 to 75 gigabytes worth of updates means that you have to have a lot of space just free
yeah,
on your hard drive. Otherwise, it refuses to download it.
yep,
So I finished Call of Duty just so I could get it off my main drive because I needed space for other games.
yeah. No, and to me, that's crazy. Like, how much, like, I understand why, but it's just, to me, it's just crazy just how big these games are. So we've talked about specs. We've talked a little bit about the games. we've talked about compatibility and features and accessories and peripherals. And after a 3 hour show here on the It's Canon podcast, Phil, are you sold with what you saw on the PlayStation 5? Will you be a day one customer?
Oh yeah, I'm sure I will be. Sony are good at taking my money.
Yeah, same here. I'm
I know you're gonna be there, so
I'm gonna be there right beside you probably.
yeah.
We'll be barbecuing outside in November, December,
Yeah,
waiting to pick
exactly.
up our system.
It'll be interesting. It is fun to watch all this stuff. It's entertaining, right? So the competition, the games, the developers, everything like that. But I'm still enjoying my PS4. Like that's the thing. Like Last of Us 2 is probably going to be a month of my life in my spare time, right? Like of me playing that and getting freaked out by the zombie things and all that. Those horror games don't sit well with me, but man, the storytelling is so good in it. So I'm looking forward to having a little bit of life in the PS4 too. Maybe I won't be there day one. Maybe I'll be there day two. I don't know. We'll
I'll
see.
be yeah, I'll be there day one just because I've basically promised my little sister my PS4, my little sister, my younger sister, a PS4 when 5 comes out. So that's why again I'm hoping that PS5 is backwards compatible for the important games. Not everything has to
Yeah,
be backwards compatible. All right, so that's that. Wow, I'm tired.
that's a marathon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a good one, Phil. That was a very good one. But before we go, Phil, do you want to tell our awesome listeners how they can get a hold of us?
Yeah, you can find us on basically any podcast software. So Spotify, SoundCloud, just anywhere you find podcasts, just look for It's Canon Podcast. As well, you can find us on Twitter, It's Canon Podcast, Facebook, Instagram, any way that you want to engage us, we're here. Let us know what you're geeking out on, and be sure to click the subscribe button.
That's exactly it. There you go. So that was the It's Canon podcast, and thank you for joining us on this monthly Geekapalooza Geekathon. It felt like. We'll be back next week, and like I said, we will be announcing what we're going to be talking about sometime in the middle of the week on Instagram Live and all of our social channels. So be sure to follow us at It's Canon Podcast. You'll be able to reach us. Let us know what you think of the show. Hey, and also, when you subscribe on Google Music, Spotify, whatever it is that you use, leave us a review, leave a comment, leave some stars. I want to really see what people are thinking about us. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. And we will start chatting and giving our review of the week. And you might be able to get something a little special from us if you do leave a review. But leave a review, let us know what you think. It really helps us out in the grand scheme of things. And by helping us out, we'll be able to help you out and talk more geek with you. So, as always, I'm Boris, and I was joined by Phil, and it's the It's Canon podcast. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hey, I think it's the main question on everyone's mind is like how much